So today we have a 2001 GMC 3/4 ton HD extended cab Duramax, and vehicle was parked next to a generator shed at a local camp, and the shed was hit by lightning, blew a hole through the roof, and shortly after that they noticed the ABS pump running in the truck continuously, which is a common failure mode for these things, but I think it was aggravated by several thousand volts of potential energy nearby. And check engine light is on. I've got the fuse pulled for the ABS, that's why the ABS light is on. Speedo doesn't work, and the transmission was reported that it wasn't shifting. So we're going to do a code scan on this and see what kind of gremlins we find. Oh, it doesn't give us the option to do a code scan, so I'm going to have to individually go into each controller. Transmission control fault, transmission MIL, class 2 serial data problem. No, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to clear all of these. I'm going to go in with a transmission, codes menu, display codes. No communication. That's not good. He did say that it wasn't shifting, but then it started to shift. Let's try data. No communication. Interesting. ABS should be offline as well. Well, I got the main fuse pulled. Yeah. Let's try the airbag. No current codes in the airbag system. Bunch of history codes. Clear. Let's try the body control module. And current codes. And class 2 shorted the battery. Clear codes. And it doesn't have a manual. It has a manual HVAC system. Instrument cluster. Current. Nothing. History. Nothing. Transfer case is manual, I believe. I'm pretty sure the transfer case is manual. No, I guess not. I'm going to look at that. Yeah, it is electronic. So the only issue we have now is this transmission controller not talking. Well, the first thing to do would be check fuses that supply power to the transmission control computer. So we'll pull up a schematic and have a look at what fuses are there. So there are two fuses, one in the left IP fuse box, a 10 amp fuse, which is a brake fuse. Oh, that's a brake light circuit. and the 20 amp fuse in the fuse box under the hood, ECMB. So I'm going to have a look at that. So this is the ECMB fuse here, which is a 20 amp fuse, which is the second one in. Let's turn the light on here, which is that guy right there. And you can see it lights a test light on both sides. I'm going to just check the rest of the fuses in this fuse panel just to be on the safe side, see if there's anything else, and then we'll have a look at the transmission computer, which is behind that cover on the rad support or rad shroud there. So all the fuses that should have power appear to have power. Here is the 60 amp fuse for the ABS. That's this one right here. And if I put that maxi fuse back in, you can hear the ABS pump motor starts to run automatically. So obviously the ABS controller with its internal relay has failed. So we're going to leave that out for now, but that shouldn't affect the transmission shifting. Let's pull this cover off over here and have a look at powers and grounds at the ECM transmission controller. So there is another ignition feed to this transmission control module to pins 2 and 4 of connector 1, and it comes from a 10 amp fuse in the fuse block. So I'm going to check that ignition 0. So this fuse here is good, as are all the rest of the fuses in the fuse block in the IP. So we're going to pull the computer out and have a look at the connector. We have to figure out which connector 1 is. Let's see, go to electrical, connector views, transmission controller. Where's transmission controller? It's always a game to figure out what they're going to put it under. Maybe it's under automatic transmission. Control module AT. Okay, so connector 1 is gray and connector 2 is red, so we want this one. Alright, we'll have a look at those connections. Well, the two connections are labeled on the ECU red and gray, and I see that this looks like it's a used computer in here already. Oh well, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. So we've got to take this gray connector out and identify those appropriate pins. So the power feed wire, the continuous feed wire, is connector 1 pin 3, and pin 2 and 4 are ignition feeds. So here is the connector, and if you look very carefully in the corner, I don't know if they're going to be able to see this on here, but in this corner there is a number 1, and down at the other end I believe it's 16. So it's a matter of counting. So I'm going to use the Load Pro to test these circuits, and I'll set that up in a sec. Okay, so I've got the meter set up to read voltage. I'm on pin number 3 with the Load Pro. That's the battery voltage from the fuse in the fuse panel under the hood here. Excuse me. And when I press the Load Pro button, the voltage doesn't drop any significant amount. So that circuit is good. Pin 2 is ignition power, which I just moved the pin over to. And I'm going to load that circuit, and that circuit is good. And pin 4, 2, 3, 4 is this one. That one has got 12.14 volts. Load the circuit, and it drops to 12.0. So that circuit is good as well. So the other wires to qualify are obviously going to be the grounds. I have to look at the schematic. So reverse polarity on the Load Pro leads. I've got the ground of the Load Pro connected to 12 volt battery source, and the probe is going to be going into pin 5, which is a constant ground, and I show battery voltage, and if I load the circuit it drops about 0.1, which is acceptable. And pin 1 and 5 are continuous grounds on this controller. And I'm loading pin 1. So it goes from 12.08 down to 11.93. So nothing wrong with the two grounds, at least not in my opinion. The two grounds are good. The three powers appear good. We're going to identify the network wires to this thing and see if we've got a lab scope reading on the network. So this is a serial data network, comes from this splice pack here to the Allison transmission controller, C1 pin 30. So all our tests are on the same connector. So I've got that pinned right now and the key is on, so there should be serial data on that wire. And if we have a look at the lab scope here, we've got a nice typical about a 7-volt square wave. I can maybe change the time base here. So there is serial data communication up to the PCM. I'm going to plug it back in and confirm we still have no communication with it. I think it got toasted. So I got the computer plugged back in for the transmission. We're going to try and communicate with it again. Still no communication with the tranny controller. So the network seems good. Powers and grounds seem good. Unless there is a output sensor that is shorted out that's taken down the computer, I would suggest that the computer has been killed by the near lightning strike. Oh, interesting. Well, we'll see if we can find another computer. So I'm trying to understand why the speedo would be dead. I'm looking at a schematic for the speedo here, and it shows the speedo is operated by a dark green white wire, circuit 817 from the PCM. Now I'm not 100% certain that this is correct because this is a diesel. I'm going to look at connector 2 pin 50 at the PCM, but that also is an input to the radio for a speed compensated volume, cruise control module, which this won't have because that would be gasoline. There's no throttle body for the cruise control. So there's a lot of misinformation in here about how this works. I think that the speedo might be networked from the transmission controller, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Damn. Should be able to see vehicle speed in the BCM maybe. Oh well, we'll do some more diagnostics. So I took this thing for a road test. Believe it or not, the transmission seems to shift through all the gears properly. The speedo was working, the odometer was working, tach's working. The only thing that doesn't function is the gear shift selector. Doesn't indicate what gear you placed it in. And I believe that that is a networked function of the transmission computer. And of course, if I scan this thing, the ECM reports a loss of communication with the transmission controller and is turning on the this check engine light because of it. So class 2 serial communication problem, lost communication with transmission, engine torque signal or transmission MIL requested. Still no communication with the transmission controller, even though it's shifting fine, which is really strange, but who knows. Let's see what the instrument panel has, if it's got any codes related to loss of communication as well. No current codes. That's interesting. Well, I'm going to check on the availability of parts for this thing.